back at it again with another video. Thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate it. So, I've been actually thinking about this for a while and I thought I'd make a video about it. Partitioning of Illinois. So, obviously, if you know anything about Illinois, you know that Chicago is, the Chicago suburbs, and then it's pretty much just the rest of the state. So, I'm actually up here in Northwest Indiana. So if you just look at a Google Maps view of Illinois, but even a little bit into Indiana, you'll kind of see that there's a lot of Chicagoland suburbs right here, and it feels like there's obviously a lot of other major cities in the state of Illinois. You got Rockford, Peoria, Champaign-Urbana, Springfield. Especially East St. Louis down here, Edwardsville, and all that. But it's mostly when you think of Illinois, your first thought's probably Chicago. And I'm up here in Northwest Indiana, and I feel more, I feel closer to Chicagoland area than we feel like the rest of the state. So I've always thought about this as a potentially interesting scenario. What would happen if Illinois got partitioned? Even a little bit of Indiana too. Maybe you partition the state along this, I-80, and then a little bit of Northwest Indiana, throw it in there. Indiana still gets coastline, Michigan City. Much of northern Illinois is now its own state. A little bit of Northwest Indiana. Or maybe you just do something like this. Again, Indiana still gets coastline. You got Michigan City right over here. You could even make the border I-65 if you really, really want to. But yeah, that would be an interesting state because you got Chicago, you got Chicagoland suburbs. You could even add Rockford into it if you really wanted to. Like, that would honestly be an interesting state just by itself. Like, there's a couple of examples around the country. Like, obviously, New York City and its suburbs are very different than upstate New York. Same thing with a bunch of cities in Texas, like Dallas, San Antonio, Houston is obviously different than Western Texas. You could honestly partition Texas. You can honestly partition New York, Illinois, even places along the West Coast like Seattle, Portland. You can make your own state just out of some of these states, especially California. Like, you can partition California into like 3 or 4 different states. Like, you can have like a Northern California, you could have like a Bay, you could have Los Angeles, you can have like San Diego. But if we're partitioning Illinois, the rest of the state outside of Chicago, like Chicago and the rest of the state are very, very different. I think a good partition would be to include Rockford down to this I-80 over to I-65 in Indiana. That'd be all right. That'd be interesting. That'd be an interesting partition. Or if you want to not include Rockford, it could be just this. Chicago is now pretty much its own state, essentially. You got Chicago, Chicagoland. Chicago is basically its own state. The rest of Illinois is, now on its own. I mean, if you can include some other big cities on the list like Peoria, Springfield, Champaign. But most of the time when you think of Chicago or you think of Illinois in general, you think of Chicago. And when you think of Chicago, you think of things like the bean or the sports teams or the pizza or whatever. But if we're partitioning states, I feel like Illinois is one of those states that definitely can be partitioned. New York can be. You obviously got New York City is very different than the rest of the state. New York City is different than Albany. Albany is different from Buffalo. Buffalo is different from New York City. Even places like parts in Texas, like the Texas Triangle, is very different from Western Texas. Much of California is very different from each other. Like SoCal and NorCal are different. But Partition of Illinois. Chicago is its own state. You get a little bit of Northwest Indiana. Indiana still gets shoreline. You got Michigan City, Portage, Chesterton along the lakefront. So there we go. That's how if I were in charge and if I decided to partition Illinois, that would probably be how I would do it. Again, Illinois is one of those states that you can definitely divide up just because the urban area really outshines the rest of the state when people think about it. Like it's Chicago, then the rest of the state, or New York City and the rest of New York, or the coastal cities of California and the rest of the state. So that's how I would partition Illinois if I had a say. So that's a end of the video. Thank you for watching, and I might make a couple other videos about how I would partition other parts of the country and other parts of other states within the country. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm going to wrap it up. I will see you all in the next video. Deuces.